after he's been coming through for you all your life, are you still going to believe? Are you still not going to believe that even now you'll make it through this patch? Hello and welcome to Bible and Chill. My name is Bongiwe. In today's episode, we will be completing our two-part series where we are talking about trusting God. In the previous episode of this particular series, which I will link down on the description box, make sure to check it out later, we had started the topic trusting God and we went over three particular verses, not verses in verse like three verses, but as in three particular scripture references that we had gone over. So we went over the first one that was found in Proverbs 3, the second one that was found in Jeremiah 17, and then there was a bit of a cliffhanger right there in the last one, because we did not break that one down, or let me say dive into it and break it down further. But I had referenced Matthew chapter 8 verse 23 to 27. However, for this episode we will be looking at the parallel of the scripture, and that is found in Mark chapter 4 verse 35 to 41. Oh, I'll be looking down from time to time because I am checking my notes. This is another one of my many journals. I'm a journal edit. Basically, I'm a stationary edit. But that's not the point. The point is, I am just checking the notes. So we'll start reading from verse 35. As the evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon, a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. I don't know why Mark felt the need to put that in there. Anyway, the disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we are going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence! Be still!" Suddenly, the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." So basically, in the story, if you read like the previous verses, because of the whole chapter, Jesus had been preaching to the crowds right by the lake of Galilee, right? So they were by the lake. He started preaching. So he preached. More people came. Because there were so many people and the crowd was so big, then he got onto the boat and just right outside the lake, and he continued preaching. Then when he was done preaching, when he was exhausted and done preaching, then he says, "Let's go cross over to the other side of the lake." And then the disciples got onto the boat and they started out going to the other side of the lake. So then while they were steering their way or navigating their way to the other side, Jesus decided that he will sleep on a cushion. On a cushion. Anywho, when they were starting out to go to the other side of the lake, let us not forget that Mark emphasizes, or let me say Mark points out, that other boats followed. I mean, there was this great teacher, right? And Jesus was here teaching. Then he decided that he's going to cross the lake. Of course, there were people who wanted to follow Jesus and they wanted to cross to the other side with him and follow him wherever he went. Okay, cool. So when Jesus said, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake," he spoke a word. That was the plan. The plan basically was, we are crossing, we're going to go to the other side of the lake. It wasn't a maybe, it wasn't a let's try, it wasn't a why don't we just, I don't know, go for a cruise. When Jesus said that, right, that was the plan. However, in as much as there was a clear plan, there was a clear promise that they were crossing over to the other side of the lake, it did not mean that they were exempted from storms or whatever challenge that the lake might bring them. So when they were right in the middle of their journey, they find themselves facing a storm. It is important to note though that the storm that they were facing found them in obedience. Unlike another storm that I have read about in the Bible, that is Jonah, who actually found himself in the storm because he thought that he would be smart enough to run away from God out of disobedience. And he ended up being eaten by a whale. But that's a story for another day. This particular storm, they were in obedience with the word that Jesus had spoken. So as they continued with their journey, there were high waves and water starts filling in the boat. So there was water that was starting to fill up in the boat, while Jesus was sleeping at the back. And the disciples found themselves in a space where they are fearful. Mind you, 4 of them were fishermen. Andrew, Peter, James, and John were fishermen. And 2 of those fishermen, Andrew and listen to me saying Simon, but yes, Simon Peter, were actually familiar with the Sea of Galilee, because that is where Jesus found them. They were fishing in Galilee when Jesus met with them and called them to be his disciples. So they were not in an unfamiliar space. That was their space. However, this got me thinking that even in familiar spaces and even in our territories, in the will of God, we might face challenges that would convince us otherwise, knowing very well that you are familiar with where you are. You know where you are, and you are right in the will of God, because everything that you are doing, you're not doing anything outside of what he would want for you, outside what he wants for your life. While they're panicking, so I can imagine there's this big storm. I'm sure the fishermen try to do whatever that they can, because I mean, you can't be in the boat in your territory and challenges are just coming your way, but you're just sitting there. I'm sure they were not folding their hands and hoping that, I don't know, a miracle would happen, because they had not had an experience with the Jesus who was able to talk to the weather and it just listens. So in the midst of their panic, they remember, there is a man who is sleeping there was a violent storm. There was waves that were breaking into the boat and water was filling up, but there's someone sleeping on a cushion. So they were like, we are dying, we're panicking, we're trying to save our lives, but how can this man sleep? I can imagine them trying to convince each other, nudging each other, say, hey, who's gonna wake him up? Wake him up, wake him up. And then finally, they decided, no, they're gonna wake him up. And then, think about this. Jesus was the Son of God, but he was human enough to be able to need sleep and to even fall asleep. Because I don't think that was just an act. Well, that's what I think. I don't think that was just an act. He was human enough to fall asleep. Anywho, so they decide they're going to wake him up and they say, teacher. That shows the level of the relationship that they had with Jesus. They understood him as a teacher, because that's what he had done with most of them. He was teaching them. But I don't think they had an experience so big that they would be able to be convinced to call him anything other than teacher. So them getting into the water and them navigating their way around the water, there must have been signs that a storm is coming. There must have been signs. But Jesus still chose to sleep, because he had already spoken a word. We are going to the other side. We're crossing over to the other side. That's what he had said. Him sleeping was not only a sign of him being human, but it's also a sign of faith. That regardless of whatever that they meet or whatever they come across right in the middle of the lake, they were going to get to the other side. Because that was the plan. Crossing over to the other side. Okay. When the disciples woke him, it took them to actually wake him up in order for him to wake up. Think about it. This was a violent storm. There was water that was filling up the boat. But he was still not waking. I'm sure his cushion was wet by the time. I'm sure it was soaking by the time. Anywho, it took for the disciples to wake him in order for him to actually pay attention to the situation. I don't think the way that I read it, I don't think they were waking him up because they were expecting him to stop the storm. Think about the way that they actually called him. They said, "Teacher." Well, this is what this version of the Bible says. "Teacher, do you not care that we are going to drown?" That was not like, "Hey, please help us" type of thing. It was more like, "Yay, we are drowning. Wake up, do something. Let's figure out what we're going to do about this situation. You can't just sleep when you are about to die." It was more of, how can you be fast asleep? How can you be sound asleep when we're facing danger? Like, who does that? I mean, if you are a rare breed of people, you know, the ones who are able to fall asleep in any situation, be fast asleep. I'm that rare breed. Be fast asleep, like literally there could be noise. Radio could be playing loudly, but still, when sleep is here, I am sleeping. Doesn't matter what the circumstance is. I am sleeping. And when he wakes up, the first thing he does is to rebuke the waves and the wind. And all he says is, "Silence, be still." When you're rebuking something, you're not talking to it. You're like that other rare breed of people. You know, the ones when you wake them up, you need to wake them up with caution. It's like you're waking them up, but you're ready to scram if something were to happen. That's a feeling that's what I imagine when I hear rebuke. Like, silence, be still. And the next thing he does after he had spoken to the circumstance or to the situation that they were facing, he then talks to his disciples. He asks them questions. All he asks them is, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" After everything you've seen me do, after everything that we have done so far, you still have no faith. This is how I see it. A lot of things happen in our lives and a lot of challenges come our way, and somehow that convinces us that it is the end of the journey for us, or that we are right at rock bottom and there's no way out, while we've already been experiencing God taking us out of difficult situations throughout our lives. The fact that you are alive in this particular moment after everything that you have been through. You can't tell me that when you are facing the next challenge, you will just give up. After everything that you have seen him do, after all the come-throughing, if that's even such a word, after he's been coming through for you all your life, are you still not going to believe that even now you'll make it through this patch? Anywho, now the disciples have a different kind of fear. It's not now that they are terrified at the storm. The storm was no longer there, but they are now terrified of the person they are traveling with. I mean, who just speaks to the weather and it obeys? So now they realize that the person that they were traveling with, the one who was human enough to fall asleep, he was God enough to calm the storm. It took that particular instance and that particular situation in order for them to realize the type of person that they were traveling with. Now let's think about it in our lives. Okay? Sometimes we respond to situations based on our own understanding and on our own knowledge. That is us leaning in our own understanding. So with them having been fishermen, they realized that when they saw that type of storm, that they were going to die, because it's nothing like they've ever faced. But if it was something that like they've ever faced before, or something similar to what they've faced before, then they would have known how to get out of it. However, this time around, they needed to trust God. They needed not to lean on their own understanding. In that particular instant, they needed to be able to trust Him. There are so many situations and so many instances in our lives where, like I was saying, that we think that there is no way out, where we think that since you've tried A, B, and C, that's it, and you give up, just like that. But in those situations, that's when we are required to put our trust in God more. Also, that is those very instances where we realize that we need Jesus more. Imagine if that faced that storm and Jesus was not in the boat, if they were not with him, if they were not in his presence. What saved them was the fact that they were in his presence. In as much as they were fearing, they faced fear and they found themselves being fearful, but because they were in his presence, they were with him. They were saved from the storm. Not only them also, even the small boats that were traveling with them, that were following Jesus as well. They probably had survived the boat. Now, if you read on the upcoming verses or the following verses from the story, you actually discover that there was actually purpose of them crossing over to the other side. It was not like Jesus just needed a break from people and he wanted to get away from the crowd or something like that. But when they got to the other side, there was actually a demon-possessed man that needed saving, the one who was so strong that nobody in that place was able to stop him. So think about it this way. The challenges that you are facing, even when you are in God's will and you are in obedience, could also be from the enemy. I don't think Jesus would have rebuked the storm and the waves if it was just normal for the storm and the waves to behave that way. Possibly could have been the enemy trying to stop them from getting to the other side. They were able to survive and make it through so that they could fulfill whatever that they were meant to be fulfilled when they were crossing over to the other side. Even now, the challenges you are facing now, they're not the end of you. You need to actually endure past the challenges. You need to be able to trust God more. You need to be in his presence more so that you can be able to make it through. Because there's something that you need to fulfill on the other side. Not just for yourself. It's not just about you, but that you have a purpose for your life that you need to fulfill. And there are people who are dependent on you crossing over to the other side. Crossing over and making it through this time. But you can't do that if you don't trust him. You can't do that with your human understanding. You can't do that when you are trusting in your own ways. Let's learn to trust him. I hope you enjoyed our 2-part series on trusting God. And if there are any other topics or any other Bible stories or Bible series that you would like us to actually cover, please let me know down on the comment section, and we will tackle it. Anywho, see you next time when we grab our Bibles and chill.